How do we make mistakes? It's something we all do. It's part of being human, and it's something that all of our users using software that we create will make. There's a number of common or characteristic ways in which we do make mistakes. So they are predictable in some sense, and because they're predictable, it means that when we are designing our software, we can try to cater for them. We can expect them, and we can think about what will we do then in return when they happen. So that's the first bit. Assume that something will go wrong because it's a probable outcome, certainly for any large group of users. So we all make mistakes, and that means that when we're designing our systems, we should not view that as something unwelcome or unexpected. It should be routine, it should be expected, it should be a key element then of how we go about in design. So expect that mistakes and errors will occur and be prepared to respond to them. Simple enough message. One of the interesting things about how we make mistakes, how we, be it an error or a mistake, is that it is predictable. We tend to do, or mistakes can fall into common types of category. And you can see a number of them indicated here on the screen. So here we're talking about performance errors, where the person is using the software and they make a mistake in terms of how they use it. So this doesn't cover, for example, mismatches or erroneous aspects around mental models and conception models and things like that. We're simply thinking about what are the steps that the person takes when they use their software to perform a particular task, and how might we classify some of those mistakes or some of those steps as mistakes. So we've got three types indicated here. The first one is commission errors. So that's where the user puts in additional steps they didn't have to do to get to the particular goal. They were unnecessary, they're just sort of wasteful steps. Didn't need them, we could get rid of them. Omission errors is the opposite of that, is that there may be some necessary steps the user had to do. They had to set this up or to specify this particular value or to do something, and they didn't do that. They omitted those particular steps. And the final type is a wrong action error. So that indicates where the right action was taken, but it was incorrect. It didn't work out. So a very good example of that is that we may require the user to put in their credentials at a certain point to authenticate, and they may then have put their details in. So that was the right action. But if they put in details that were wrong, they put in the password wrongly, then they may have taken the right action, but it wasn't successful. That action failed, and it was the fault, so to speak, of the user because it failed. So that's three common types. Now, alongside that, you do have lots of other types. There are motor control errors, where, for example, the user misclicks or touches the wrong element or grabs the device and it triggers something accidentally, and so on. So takeaway in this is that when we are designing our interface and our interactions with the user, we also want to think about, well, what could go wrong? What steps might be omitted? What extra things could be put in? What steps could be correctly taken, but the details may not be valid or may not pass whatever role they have. And for those then, we want to try to identify those that have most concern. That sometimes a mistake's just something that makes it slightly inefficient or something the user has to go back and resupply. Other times mistakes can have quite dramatic impacts. So we also want them to think about what's the impact of each of the mistakes. When we're doing our user testing, we get a chance then to actually see what mistakes users do. Hopefully, through our design, we will try to minimize these, but then we do actually get a chance to test it against our actual users to see what happens for real. And we might then discover that there are errors that we haven't adequately prepared for or expected. Interestingly, whenever we're under stress and under a significant amount of stress, we make more errors. And this falls into what's known as the Yerkes-Dodson law, but it's not sort of a linear relationship. So this talks about how well we perform in different types of tasks, subject to the amount of arousal, be it physiological or mental. So at a certain point, are we bored? Are we sort of moderately interested? Are we excited? Are we under a lot of stress? So you can define a spectrum of the amount of arousal then that an individual is under whilst he or she is performing a certain type of task. What they do notice though is that whenever you get beyond a certain point, so whenever stress becomes too high, performance decreases. We get worse at that particular activity. So the amount of stress or arousal, the amount of interest the person needs to have in it, that very much depends upon the task that an individual is doing. If you have a very simple task, so it's easily done or the person's done it an awful lot of time, and we want them to do it as best as they possibly can be, we do actually need a bit of arousal. We need to have a little bit of pressure just on the user so that they perform as best as they possibly can. Conversely, that if we're doing something that is really quite difficult for the user and they maybe haven't done it before, we want them to do it in an environment where they have very little stress, because even if they have a little bit, that's likely to dramatically reduce their performance. So takeaway in this, for simple or boring tasks, make it exciting, make it more exciting. That's likely then to encourage the user to engage with it more strongly, to have better performance. For challenging tasks, try to make sure we're turning things down. The user is in as quiet an environment as we can create through our software, isn't distracted, and all of those types of aspects. So in terms of when errors happen, we use a number of different types of strategy ourselves to try to recover from them. And this was a survey done by Kang and Young, 2008, where they give people an individual task based on the computer, and then they looked at, okay, made sure it was going to fail. How did people try to recover from that particular one? And they've identified three main approaches that people tend to use. The first one is, and I should just say that these are not, one individual only uses one approach. We can use all three of these approaches, and we do, and we use them at different times for different types of tasks. These are just ways that we go about trying to solve our problems. The first one is systematic exploration. So in that sense, then we come up with a plan. Okay, so something has failed, so I'm going to try this first of all. Try the first option. That doesn't work, I'll go into the second option, I'll try that, then I'll try this other third one. So we come up with a series of steps and we work systematically through those steps until our problem is solved or we run out of steps. The next method is trial and error, where in that sense then it's similar to systematic but without the planning bit. We just try some other option to see, does that work? We put in another figure and we see, what effect does that have? Does it bring us closer to what we want to achieve? Did it have an interesting output? And the third type is rigid exploration, where in that sense we do the same actions again and we hope that the problem will go away. Now, we actually do that quite a lot. So for example, if our internet connection is down, we may just hit retry. If it doesn't work, we'll may wait a wee bit and hit retry again, and that may be our approach then and to solve the problem. So we use all of these, and we can expect then where users are encountering errors inside our programs as they use them, that they will revert to some of these different techniques, and we can then try to sort of build in a little bit of support around our applications for how we do that. So that brings us to the end of this particular section. We have one more topic to cover in terms of our exploration of how we think, and it's going to be based around how we decide, how we make decisions. So that will be in the next video.